Hello, this is His Word Unveiled, and today we are starting something new. We are jumping into the book of Exodus. There's so much power and truth packed in this book. This is actually one of my favorite books of the Bible. So much goodness ahead. So much that I believe that the Lord wants to do in me and in you. So thank you for joining me. Today in our reading will be Exodus chapter 1 and chapter 2. We are going to hit both chapters. So you go ahead and do your thing, meet with the Lord. Make sure your heart and your eyes and your ears are open to what the Lord wants to teach you and show you. I just finished reading it. I'm so excited to go over this with you, walk through it with you. Go ahead and do that. Read through, take that time with the Lord, you and God. I will pray and we will do what we do in walking this out together. Lord, thank you for your word. I pray that as we begin this new book of the Bible, as we begin going through and taking a look at Exodus, I pray that you do something new within us, that there is a movement within us as we walk through this book of your word. Father, I pray that there's a stirring. I pray that there's a change. I pray that you just take us wherever you want to take us and show us what it is. Teach us what you want us to be taught through the book of Exodus. Let it change our lives. Give us a new perspective through it. Just a newness by going through this because of your power and because of your hand and your heart all over your word. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, here we go. Exodus chapter 1. So we saw Genesis finished up with Jacob had passed. He had just given those blessings to his kids. They are living in the land of Goshen. We saw Joseph being able to be placed in position in the land of Egypt and being able to preserve the children of Israel and be able to preserve his family, help his family in giving them food, inviting them into the land of Egypt where they are at right now in Goshen. On the outskirts of Egypt. So in the word, that's where Genesis left off, that Jacob had passed away. Their families were living and settling and growing and multiplying and growing in strength and numbers in the land of Goshen. We see Jacob then had passed away. So Exodus then starts right off and just naming the sons of Israel. We see in just verse 1 who came to Egypt. So they came from the land of Canaan into the land of Egypt, the sons of Israel. And they list them out in verse 2. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. They do not mention Joseph because Joseph was already in Egypt. We see that in verse 5. So there were 70 in number that came from Canaan into the land of Egypt, settling in the land of Goshen, which is the outskirts of Egypt. And then Joseph already being in Egypt. In verse 6, we see then that Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. So everyone, this whole time frame of when they came from Canaan, settled in the land of Goshen. Joseph was in charge. Joseph was just right under Pharaoh. All this good connection. You know, the sons of Israel, when they came in, they were in Goshen because being shepherds and Hebrews and all that was an abomination to the Egyptians. But at the same time, they were honored, they were respected, they were taken care of. Pharaoh said, whatever they need, whatever they want, whatever you want to give them, give them. So there's this really tight-knit relationship that still gave them a separation and enabling the Egyptians to do what they do with their culture, and the Hebrews, the sons of Israel, able to do what they do in worshiping freely. So that separation, but still that tight-knit understanding of honor and respect and connection with that. But then we see with all of that, with all of those people in connection and forming that relationship, that those people, that whole generation, it says, had died. So they are no more. Those foundations of relationships, the way that they were connected, that honor and respect and knowing each other and doing things and giving each other and understanding those dynamics is all long gone. And that's important to know going into the book of Exodus. So we see in verse 7, but the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. So this is what God promised, that he would multiply them, that they would be numerous as the grains of sand, and that this blessing would come. And remember, that blessing is not just when they arrived in the promised land. That blessing came with God saying, I am with you. You know, I will be with you. I'm going to bless you. It's this whole process of being with the Lord and not just trying to arrive at a place of blessing. It's understanding that the blessing comes with just being in the presence of God, with being with him. So we see them being fruitful, greatly increasing. I mean, it says that they're filling the land in strength and number and might, in power. So then in verse 8, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So not only did Joseph and all of his brothers and that whole generation die, but also we have a new king now in Egypt. So nobody knows each other. Nobody knows how strong this connection was, how great this relationship was. Then it says, this new king over Egypt, we see in verse 9, he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. So they see how great the sons of Israel are becoming. They see how mighty, they see how many there are and how they are multiplying, how they are being blessed. They're seeing this and it is terrifying them. They are living in the land of Egypt, and the Egyptians are seeing this, seeing that they're getting greater than us. They're getting more mightier than us. We have to do something about this. So they assign taskmasters on them, and they make them start working vigorously, really hard labor. They start treating them unfairly to bring them down, to get them to this defeated state so that they don't rise up in more and more power. This is all done out of fear from this new king of Egypt. It says, though, that though they are afflicting them with hard labor, we see in verse 12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. So this fear is growing. And we know that fear, when we respond, when we react to that fleshly emotion of fear, then it drives us to do things that are not cool. Just straight up not cool. So we see this fear rising. And it says in verse 13, the Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor and mortar and bricks and all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which were rigorously imposed on them. Then we see the rest of this chapter, we see that the king of Egypt goes to the Hebrew midwives, and they tell them, hey, when these Hebrew women, when they have babies, if it's a son, kill it. I'm commanding you to kill all of the sons. When they give birth, you kill them. If it's a daughter, don't worry about it. Let her live. Because here's that fear and understanding that these men, if men are born of the Israelites and they're going to grow into these strong, mighty men, that their numbers will continue to increase, that they will be yet stronger and more compared to those in Egypt. So the king is telling the midwives, you need to kill them if they are boys. Then it says, I love this in verse 17, but the midwives feared God. There's fear of God and not of man. Fearing God and revering him and understanding who he is. And understanding that fear of God, it's not that we are afraid of God. It's that we are aware of who he is, of his holiness, and we desperately want to please him, to love him, to serve him, because we see him in his rightful position. And that fear, that reverence is wanting to do, wanting to be, wanting to serve, wanting to love, and understanding the might, the holiness, the goodness wrapped up in who God is. So we see the midwives feared God. And in verse 17 it says, and they did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but they let the boys live. And the king of Egypt, Pharaoh approaches these midwives and says, why are you letting these boys live? This is not cool. I gave you a command and you are not following through. And the midwives are like, oh, well, the Hebrew women, they're so much more vigorous, and they birth these babies before we can even get to them. and the midwives are just set in what they're doing, and I love, they fear God. They fear God and chose not to listen to the voice of man, not to listen to the pressures of the world telling them to do certain things and live a certain way, but they feared God, and they are not obeying, they're not listening, they're not following the commands of what these worldly figures are telling them because of their fear of God, because of their love of the Lord. And the Lord blesses them for it. We see in verse 20, so God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. And I love even thinking God was good to the midwives. Because of the midwives' obedience, then God's blessing, his covenant, is being just established. It's being revealed because they're being obedient. That was part of God's plan, God's blessing, God's covenant upon the sons of Israel. That through that obedience, the sons of Israel were growing in number, were growing in might more and more and more, just as God has spoken, just as God spoke that life into the nation of Israel. Verse 21, it says, because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. So he is growing, laying even more and more of these foundations, these opportunities for them, these expanding their space, expanding their families, expanding their lives, their living, these generations. There's more blessing poured in because of the midwives' obedience and reverence to the Lord. Then in verse 22, this finishes up chapter 1, and saying, then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So this fear is just going crazy, and he's saying, look, even these Hebrew midwives are not listening to me. You know, the sons of Israel, and their strength and their obedience and reverence to the Lord is more than obeying me as king of Egypt, and they're not following through. And so he throws out a command, and every son who is born is to be thrown into the Nile. That these Hebrew babies, he does not want living, he does not want growing, he does not want these families expanding, enlarging, being, growing in power, in strength. So he says, every son who's born, throw him into the Nile. So then this takes us right into chapter 2, the story of Moses. It says, now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. So this is from the tribe of Levi. Remember, Levi, Joseph's brother Levi, has passed, but him being the head, the lead, the father of this household, of the tribe of Levi, then we have in this family, within this family, comes Moses. In verse 2 it says, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket. Wicker meaning that papyrus reed, it's just made out of that, and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. So of course this command goes out that Pharaoh said that all of the baby boys are to be thrown in the Nile, thrown in so that they drown, so that they're no longer, so that the sons of Israel will eventually die off, and Egypt can reign to its power and have no fear of another nation being more and stronger than they. So this command is done. All the women know that if they birth a son, he is to be thrown in the Nile. If they do not do that, well, then it will be done. It will be taken care of by this Egyptian empire, these people. That is the command. That is what is to be done. So this woman from the tribe of Levi births this beautiful baby boy and hides him for 3 months. When she realizes, look, I can't keep doing this, then she makes this basket, and places the child in the basket and sends him off. Now when she did this, his sister, this baby boy's sister, was watching, wanted to make sure that she knew he was okay, was following the basket down the river, seeing where it would end up. Then in verse 5 we see the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him, and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister saw that the daughter of Pharaoh saw him, and noticed that he was a Hebrew child. The sister came and said, would you like me to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. And the daughter of Pharaoh says, yes, go, go ahead. So then in verse 9 we see, then Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So she is giving the child back over to his sister and saying, go, take care of this child and I will pay you for him. So then in verse 10, we see that the child grew, the mother was able to nurse him, take care of him, and then it says that she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So the daughter of Pharaoh then adopts Moses, takes him in as her son. And it says in verse 10, and she named him Moses, which means drawn out or drawing out, and said, because I drew him out of the water, his name meaning Moses. And that whole definition of drawing out is just the beginning, and hearing he was drawn out of the water. That becomes his whole purpose, and drawing the people out of slavery, out of bondage, out of this captivity in Egypt. Okay, so then it goes into this humanness of Moses. We see this in all of these prominent people, these incredible people that God uses, and we see their shortcomings and their humanness coming out. And it's so encouraging to know that these people that God chose, they're not perfect. They all have flaws. They've all messed up. And it's just so encouraging to see this, and to see that it's not about us becoming perfect, not about us never making a mistake. It's us seeking the Lord, pursuing him, chasing after him. And when we fail, when we fall, when we fall short and make a mistake, whatever it may be, whatever it looks like, that we still know that the love of God is poured upon us, that we are still in opportunity to receive grace, to seek the Lord, to learn from that, and to know that he is always pursuing us. He is always loving us. He is always drawing us to himself. So we see, it says that Moses had grown. He went out and he's seeing how his brethren, because remember, he is a Hebrew. He is adopted, though, by Pharaoh's daughter. So adopted into this culture of Egypt, of the Egyptians. He is Hebrew, and he said that it says in verse 11 and 12 and further in that he goes out, he's walking, and he sees his brethren being treated harshly. And he sees an Egyptian treating a Hebrew, so one of his people, treating a Hebrew harshly, as I said, and it just sets Moses off. And he goes and he kills the Egyptian. He sees this injustice done. He doesn't like it. It does something, stirs things up in him, this anger. And he goes and he kills this Egyptian. And then it says that he hides him in the sand. In verse 12 we see that. He struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. How often do we see that? Wrong done to other people, and we step in and feel like we can be mean, or we can get back, or we can... we can take care of the situation and make it right, when our sin, when our approaching them in discouragement, in assaulting them verbally, physically, whatever it is, when we attack, when we go in, our wrong does not make that wrong right. And Moses did not understand that, and that is a lesson for us to learn as well. When we see wrong happening, there are other ways around than to approach, than to attack, than to react in that anger, in that emotion swelling up. But we see that that's what Moses did. He reacted in the heat of his anger. He killed this Egyptian and he hid him. Then he made a comment, it says in verse 13, two Hebrews were fighting, and he makes a comment and says, why are you guys fighting? You shouldn't be doing this. And they snapped back and said, are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? Who are you to judge us? And so Moses then realized, he's like, oh no, this is made known. People know about this. I can't hang around here. It says that Pharaoh even tried to have him killed, understanding what he did, that he did kill an Egyptian. So Pharaoh's after him. He freaks out, and he then runs. He flees. It says that he fled from the presence of Pharaoh. We see that in verse 15, and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Then we see this interaction with him and these 7 daughters of the priest of Midian, and the shepherds came and were trying to just shove them away. Moses defended them. Moses stayed there, helped them water their sheep, take care of them, protected them. The daughters go back, let their father know, who their father was the priest of Midian. And he called Moses in and said, hey, stay here. Thank you for doing this for my daughters. Moses stayed with him then, the priest of Midian. And then it says in verse 21, Moses was willing to dwell with a man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses. So Moses then marries this Midianite daughter named Zipporah. They are married. Then in verse 22, we see that she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom. For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So we have this Hebrew baby who was adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh, by this Egyptian woman. And then we see him running to the land of Midian and marrying a Midianite woman. Then to finish up this chapter, we see in verse 23, now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. So the king who wanted to kill Moses for killing that Egyptian had died. Then it says, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. I love this. That also translates that took notice of them is God knew them. God knew them. God saw them. God is a God who sees. He sees their affliction. He sees the way that the Egyptians are treating the sons of Israel. And remember, back in several chapters ago, he spoke this, and he said, when Abraham was like, how do I know, like what, how can I be assured that my descendants will be numerous? And God said, gave him that dream in the night. Remember, it terrified him because God revealed to him that his children, those generations, the sons of Israel, that they would be in captivity for 430 years. They would be slaves to another nation, but that God then would punish that nation. God spoke this. God spoke this years in advance, and now it is coming to be. And God saw them then. God saw them when he spoke that to Abraham. And God is saying and remembering and saying, I see you. I hear your groanings. I know you. I know what you're going through. Just reassuring, letting them know this, I am a God who sees. I see you. I hear your groanings. That is how chapter 2 finishes up, with Moses being married and with God being very clear that he is in this, that he hears that there's a plan, that something is going to take place, and there surely is, that God is going to move forward in this, and he's going to use Moses to do that. So that is all I have with those chapters. I encourage you to go through, really get a grip on who Moses is, on the beginning of this all with Moses and how this all started, because it's just beginning with him, with his life, with how God wants to use him, and how incredibly powerful this is, with God's hand all over this, with God drawing us out. He does not want us in captivity. He wants us out and walking with him and into his blessings, into his promised land. So we will see this incredible story and moving into this. That is all for today. Thank you for walking this out with me. Keep going. Don't stop there. Keep going with you personally, seeking more and more, wanting more, digging in. Don't stop. Don't grow content. There's layers and layers and layers that you will see every time you read. So don't get too familiar with these stories. Make sure you're not rushing through. I'm going to stop yapping, and I will see you soon.